So in today's class, we will go ahead and we will continue with, India's long road, the search for prosperity. So just a quick revision of what we've already done. So what we did is the following. So in the last class, I explained you that if we start from the period of 1947 till the period when the author has written the book, 1915, he said that the first 3 years of course till 1950, ये जो 3 साल थे बेटा, these 3 years, he said, were required for stabilization, for stabilizing the economy, because we have just got independence. But then post this, he mentioned that, look, now we need to go ahead and we need to divide this entire period in 2 parts. So in order to divide this entire period in 2 parts, he went ahead and he took a cutoff in between. And that was the cutoff of 1980. So he said that from 1950 to 1980, this is a separate period. What was this period? This was the period of role of government, high role of government. This was the period of command and control economy. Right? And then he mentioned that this period, this was the period of the market. This was the period of commercialization. And these 2 periods, they were characterized by very different growth rates, right? So here we had approximately the Hindu growth rate. And here approximately the growth rate was 6%. So the growth rate in the 2 periods were also very different, right? So now we want to go ahead and we want to talk about this entire, so we have already understood this part. Now I want to go ahead today and I want to talk about why India failed to achieve rapid growth for 3 decades after independence. इंडिया को रैपिड ग्रोथ क्यों नहीं मिली थी, ये भी जानना जरूरी है. So we understood that the growth rate was 3.5%, but why was that the case? Why was India not able to achieve growth? That is what we want to understand. So let's look into it. See, but the first reason that I'm going to go ahead and give is the same that we have already studied, that it is a command and control economy. So ये जितना भी हमारा period था 1950 से 1980 का, these 30 years, this was the period where there was heavy role of the government. And the government went ahead and decided what should be produced and what should not be produced, what would be imported, what would not be imported. So government was very, very strongly into a model of commanding the economy, of telling the economy what should be done, right? So this is the first important reason why we failed during these periods, why we did not went ahead and we did not achieve the right growth in this period. Now, yahi se, I want to just focus on one more point here itself, and I will be talking about this point a bit below also. I think I've written somewhere below. I will be here. So this was the period where we had a Soviet Union model. So although jab hum Mahalanobis, when Mahalanobis was asked whether you prepared your model based on a Soviet Union model, he said no. He said कि मैंने तो कभी Soviet Union model के बारे में नहीं पढ़ा. But the strategies during this period were strictly, especially the second year plan, they were very closely related to the Soviet Union model. Ab Soviet Union model कहता क्या है? Many people still don't know what is Soviet Union model. So I will just like to write a bit about it also. So beta, the Soviet Union model It was basically the result of socialist revolution in Russia in 1917. हाँ, तो जब रशिया में 1917 में revolution आया था, when we had a revolution in Russia in 1970, because of that you had the emergence of the Soviet Union model. And what did Soviet Union model went ahead and said? Soviet Union model, it was based on the ideology of socialism, right? So socialism is just the reverse of capitalism. So in the last class, I explained you this thing कि ये वाला मैंने आपको पूरा स्टोरी बताया था ना, that US was following a capitalist economy, और क्योंकि US एक capitalist economy follow कर रही थी, when US realized that India was against, I mean not against, but India's political thinking was very different. तो जब US को इंडिया को खाना सप्लाई करना था through the ocean, it was shipping it. So US tried to twist the political policies of India. And when India did not agree to the twisting, then US just dumped the food in the ocean. I explained you that. So what India tried to follow was a model based on Soviet Union, and that was a model of socialism. And that model of socialism was against, it was opposite of the model of the capitalism. Capitalism के एकदम against था. और socialism बोलता क्या है? Socialism basically argues for state control over the economy. So it says that you should have argues for state control of economy. Right. So it basically says that we need to go ahead and we need to create a culture where everything is state owned, right? Whether it is through the means of production, farming, industrial manufacturing, right? Everything must be state owned, right? And it also mentions that you should have administrative command system. Okay. So basically what we saw is, because we mention here about the state and control strategy, India ने भी ऐसा ही कुछ देखा कि the government was pro the command and control strategy. Government चाहती थी कि सब कुछ government के अंडर हो, सब कुछ controlled by the government, है ना? So that is the first reason why we failed to achieve a higher or a rapid growth rate. But the second point that we have, that is called as convolute regulation of, one second. The second point we have, that is called as convolute regulation of economic activity. Convolute का मतलब क्या होता है? Convolute in Hindi means उलझा हुआ. So when I say convolute, right, or when I say convulsions, right, then it means that this is something which is not clearly defined, right? तो जो हमारी regulations थी for our economic activities, they were not clearly defined, right? उनमें एक clarity नहीं थी. It was not clearly defined. It was extremely complicated. It was extremely difficult to follow. So if I were to go ahead and open up a business, अगर मुझे एक नया business शुरू करना है, then things were not very clear. What exactly should be done, right? Should I be going ahead and applying for license number 1, license number 2? Should I be going to public sector, government 1, government 2? Where I should be going? Which office I should be going? How many licenses I should be applying? All that was very, very complicated. So it was a very difficult system to go ahead and follow. That's the second part. So difficult and complicated rules and regulation for starting any business. तो बेटा एक ना इंडेक्स होता है, that index is known as ease of doing business. ये मैंने आपको जीएसटी के लेक्चर में भी एक्सप्लेन किया था. So when I talk about ease of doing business basically tells us how easy or how difficult it is for me to start my business, right? And during this period, it was very, very difficult for any person to go ahead and start the business. So that's the second aspect. Now, but the third aspect says inappropriate and excessive state intervention in the market. I will try to elaborate this. I want to elaborate on this. So excessive and inappropriate state intervention in the market. ध्यान से समझो. Having excessive state intervention is one thing. कि बहुत ज़्यादा state की intervention थी. That is one thing. But second thing is that this was also inappropriately done. जहां जहां पर state की intervention की जरूरत नहीं थी, where state intervention was not required, even there state was intervening. So that is inappropriate and excessive. पहली बात देखो इसमें, private players were represented as villains. तो ऐसा लगता था कि wherever my private players will be there, basically there that sector will not prosper. वो sector अच्छे से काम नहीं करेगा, right? So at all times, it was thought that private players are a villain to the economy. Second, dislike towards business. So it was thought that, it was not, people were not motivated to do business. जो भी लोग business कर रहे थे, the government was not pro-business. The government was against business, right? So one, private players were represented as villains. Second, there was dislike towards business. So isme na, I want to explain one point. So every economy has a pyramid. Thoda sa samjho. Every economy has a pyramid. So beta, when I talk about a pyramid, the lowest level of pyramid are more people with low income. Right? And the top of the pyramid, right, beta? These are, I can say, less people or concentration. बहुत कम लोग हैं. Concentration of people having high income. So government was against the fact that some people should have high income. Okay. So government just took all their income and started distributing to the low people, to the lower level of the pyramid. अब ध्यान से समझने की बात है इसमें. देखो, if Ambanis are earning more, I cannot go ahead and just take all their income and distribute among the poor. I have to find some other ways, some other technique to go ahead and to increase the income of the poor. Going ahead and taking the income of the Ambanis and giving it to the poor is not the right thing to do, na? But during this period, this is what the government was following. It was going ahead and taking the income of the people at the top of the pyramid and redistributing to the people at the bottom of the pyramid. So there was also dislike towards the price mechanism. Matlab, what do we follow today, beta? We go ahead and follow this, that we have demand, supply, and wherever demand and supply intersect, that is how the price is determined in the economy. But that was not the case during that period. We had a dislike towards the price mechanism. हम कौन से price पे चीजों को बेचें या खरीदें, what price we wanted it to exist, whatever was government determined. So the government wanted that even the price of different products should be determined by the government itself. That is the next thing. Next, देखो बेटा, Swadeshi movement. So this is an on and off thing. We know even now we have Atmanirbhar Bharat, right? So Swadeshi movement basically went ahead and suggested that we want to go ahead and we want to focus on self-manufacturing. And we don't want to go ahead and we don't want to export or import. दोनों ही नहीं करने. So यहाँ पर एक बहुत important point है. Again, I will be talking about this here. So I just want to highlight it now itself. So beta, there was something which is known as export pessimism. ठीक है, ये स्वदेशी मूवमेंट से थोड़ा सा लिंक्ड है, so I want to cover it now. What is export pessimism? So जब हम export pessimism की बात करते हैं, what does this mean? It means that you will only export to combat the imports. तो इसमें दो pointers important है. First says that I want to do as less imports as possible. I want to do as less imports as possible during that period. हाँ, ये चल रहा था. So for example, the government will say, look, do an import only if it is very, very required. तो suppose मुझे सिर्फ 100 rupees के import की जरूरत पड़ गई. So I will import goods worth 100 into my economy. Then export pessimism says कि जितने के आप import करोगे उतने के ही बस export करो. We just want to balance out. So if you have imported goods worth 100, then you should be exporting goods worth 100 only to balance out this trade. मतलब we are not promoting import or export. We are promoting Swadeshi movement. We are promoting that you should be going ahead and you should be producing within India and consuming within India. But suppose you require some import, suppose at the end of the day, the country requires some import, then export should only be done to balance out the import. सिर्फ उतने ही export करो जो import को balance out करने के लिए जरूरी हो. Right? So we are saying the following, that only export as much as import to balance out and minimize import and export only to match the import. Is this part clear? Okay. So this is what is export pessimism. So Swadeshi movement was promoted, and when we talk about Swadeshi movement, we are actually going ahead and saying that we want to do export pessimism, जो मैंने अभी explain किया. हाँ बेटा. Okay, come ahead. Then of course I've already explained this point that we went ahead and we followed a Soviet Union model. Assumed excessive government intervention required to control the market. तो उन्होंने बोला कि देखो market controlling easy नहीं है, and if we want to go ahead and control the market, तो market को control करने के लिए we need excessive role of the government. We need excessive intervention from the government. Only when government intervenes, the economy will be able to do well. ये उनका thought process था. So बेटा, because all of these were thought processes, that is why, if I just go back, that is why we failed to achieve rapid growth for the 3 decades. है ना? So इसी के हम reasons पढ़ रहे हैं, and within this was another part. Okay. Then comes the next point. No economic activity could be pursued without appropriate licenses. तो ये एक बहुत important point था. That हर चीज में ना we had a license system. इसको बोलते थे license raj. You would have heard about it. So when I talk about license system, what does this mean? To start any business, small or big, for every aspect I want to go ahead and I will be required for a license. उस license को पाने के लिए, to get that license, I will have to bribe 10 other people. It was not easy to get a license and start a business. And if you don't have license, you cannot do that economic activity. So doing an economic activity, in other words, starting a factory, doing any business, doing any manufacturing, was very, very difficult. Then it says that there was no role of private sector in contributing to economic growth. अब क्योंकि private sector को हमने villain की तरह दिखाया, because we saw that private sectors were villain, because we had a dislike towards business, because we had a dislike towards the market mechanism, because we kept everything under the role of the government, of course, there will be no economic activity due to all of this in the private sector. And अगर private sector की कोई economic activity होगी ही नहीं, if there will be no economic activity, then automatically there will be no contribution in the economic growth. Clear हुई ये बात? So all of these are sub points to excessive and inappropriate state intervention in the market. So this is done, huh? Okay, beta, come to the next point. So next point says slow growth rate. So ye we have already seen that during this entire period, we saw that the growth rate on an average was 3.5%. So ye 3% thi, it grew to 4% and then it again fell. So the growth rate during this entire period of 1950 to 80 was very, very small, very, very less. Second, next point. But the next point is dominant role of the public sector. Again, is I want to analyze this a bit. I want to take this forward, elaborate karte hain. So I will come down further and I will talk a bit about the dominant role of the public sector. ध्यान से समझो जरा बेटा. So when I talk about the public sector, its role was much more than the traditional utility. मतलब ideally what do we think? कि government क्यों चाहिए हो सकती है? Government is usually required for defense. Number one, it is required for defense. Then when is government required? Government की वहां पर जरूरत होती है जहां पे private sector invest ना करना चाहे. So like for example, metro, railways, during that time, even other things like telecommunication. So wherever private sector cannot invest, that is where we require the role of the government. So ideally, one is to believe that we need government only because our traditional sector is not working, only where the private sector will not come. So traditional sectors may like defense, metro, I mean the railways, the communication, यहाँ पे government की जरूरत रही होगी. But this was not the case. The role of the government, it was extended even to the hospitality industry. मतलब जहां पर भी hotels बनने थे, like for example Ashoka Hotel, even for the hospitality industry, the role of the government was extended, right? Jahan pe private players could easily enter, even there we saw government existence. Similarly, consumer goods could easily be produced by the private sector, but even there the role of the government was extended. Traditional large industries, even there the role of the government was extended. So we saw that in a lot of places the role of the government was extended. आगे देखो, expected to be highly profitable. One second, expected to be highly profitable and spearhead growth. तो क्या assume किया जाता था? It was assumed, this is very big assumption और बहुत ही गलत assumption थी. It was assumed that the government sector will be making profit and that profit will lead to growth, right? So this itself was a very big and wrong assumption. But क्या ऐसा हुआ? Did the government sector make any profit? Did the government sector lead to growth? No, it did not. So what we saw is that in fact, many of the government sector enterprises, they made losses. Profit तो नहीं हुआ, but बहुतों ने loss जरूर किया. So many of them made losses and they were sick public sector undertakings. Sick matlab, in a way, they don't have money. And जिनके पास money नहीं है, what are they? Bankrupt. So ये देखा गया कि no, the public sector undertaking were not making any profit. They were not leading to growth. Instead, they were making losses and instead they were the one which did not have money. And to revive them, it was a huge burden on the government to make them alive, to keep them alive. For their revival, the government required tons and tons of money. तो जब गवर्नमेंट ने अपना ही पैसा इनको अलाइव करने में खर्च किया, to keep them alive, to go ahead and to revive them, then in that sense, beta, the government started having fiscal deficit or a fiscal burden. है ना? So government was spending its money to revive its own sectors which it thought would be profitable and would lead to growth. तो जो लगता था कि प्रॉफिटेबल होंगे, ग्रोथ करेंगे, इंस्टेड वो प्रॉफिट नहीं कर रहे थे, वो ग्रोथ नहीं कर रहे थे, रादर वो क्या कर रहे थे, वो लॉसेस कर रहे थे और गवर्नमेंट के लिए ही बर्डन बनते जा रहे थे. Here I want to go ahead and I want to focus on another very important aspect why this was happening. And for that, beta, you would have heard of तो जब हम इस रोल ऑफ द गवर्नमेंट की बात करते हैं, यू वुड हैव हर्ड ऑफ समथिंग व्हिच इज नोन एज, अच्छा बाय द वे इन द लास्ट क्लास आई एक्सप्लेन्ड यू ना कि इनको हम व्हाइट एलिफेंट्स भी बोलते हैं. हाँ, तो यू वुड हैव हर्ड ऑफ इन माइक्रो इकोनॉमिक्स समथिंग व्हिच इज नोन एज प्रिंसिपल एजेंट प्रॉब्लम. प्रिंसिपल एजेंट प्रॉब्लम का एक एस्पेक्ट, वन ऑफ द एस्पेक्ट्स ऑफ प्रिंसिपल एजेंट प्रॉब्लम says that if you don't incentivize enough the people who want to work, then they will not work. ठीक है? So for example, दो चीजें हैं. हाँ, suppose say I am working under you, right? You don't do any kind of inspection. Huh? You don't see my working. And at the same time, you don't pay me enough money, right? My money is not productivity based. My money is to be given to me every month, but iska koi productivity linkage nahi hai. Will I work? I will not. But if you now link my work to productivity, or you give me enough incentive to work, matlab in a way you give me some more money if I show that I've worked hard, then I will be working hard even when you don't have a check over me. So basically agency problem was very high in public enterprises. And beta, when I talk about agency problem का क्या मतलब है? Agency problem का मतलब ये है that people were not having enough incentive to work. Salary तो irrespective month के end में आनी ही थी. That was no reason why I will start working, right? So that is what happened here. So this is another important reason for the inefficiency in the public enterprises. Actually, there were more reasons for inefficiencies. So no penalty for inefficient performance and conflicting role of the employees. तो वो लोग जो inefficiently perform कर रहे थे, those people who were performing inefficiently, there was no punishment for them. It's not that they were fined or something, huh? And secondly, the role of the employees was very conflicting. So when I talk about conflicting role of employees, इसका क्या मतलब है? It means that in the public sector, each employee, but they had a lot of bosses over them. एक boss नहीं था. So imagine like this, huh? Suppose I come and I want to work in an organization. Person A tells me, go ahead and work with the sales team. Person B tells me, go ahead and work with the analytics team. Person C tells me something else, go and do some manual work. If I will be asked to do multiple works by multiple bosses, then I will not be able to do any of the work properly. Same is the role with the employees. Same is the role with the public sector. So what happened in the public sector, like it happens today also, like for example, with the government school teachers, क्या होगा? They will be asked to work during elections. They will be asked to go ahead and they will be given duty during that period. Then they will be asked to take various schemes of the government till the rural area. Then they will be asked, of course, to teach. So they're asked multiple conflicting roles rather than just working on what they're required to do. ठीक है बेटा? तो इससे क्या होता है ना? इससे inefficiency create होती है. So this is another point of inefficiency. Then you have something which is known as MRTP and FERA. So you would have heard of this act in 1967 में आया था. MRTP Act basically monopolies को restrict करने के लिए launch किया गया था. So it was monopolistic and restrictive. Let me write down the full form. Monopolistic and restrictive Trade Practice Act 1967. So the MRTP Act, it came in 1967 और इसका काम main क्या था कि we want to regulate the unfair trade practices and monopolies in the business. हम business में monopolies नहीं रहने देंगे. Now you may think this is a good thing कि ठीक है, positive बात है that we want to promote competition and we want to restrict the monopolies, right? But there is something else that started happening here. अब यहाँ पे we started restricting production beyond a certain level. मतलब, so for example, let's say that the government tells you that you can produce 100 shoes. So, but if you wanted to produce even 101 shoes in your factory, you had to take permission from the government. So beyond a certain level, you could not produce. You had to take permission from the government. Similarly, reservation of production of certain products for SSIs. क्या किया गया? कुछ products को reserve कर दिया गया कि ये सिर्फ small scale industries ही produce करेंगी. So these SSIs, they are now called as MSMEs. But during that period, they were called as SSIs. So we went ahead and we restricted. हमने क्या बोल दिया? हमने बोला कि look, things like suppose soap. Just an example, huh? हमने बोल दिया suppose soap will be produced only by small scale industry. So now large scale industry cannot enter this market. Now, suppose small scale industry में भी इसको कोई produce नहीं करता in the country, then country ended up importing it. क्योंकि large scale को हमने मना कर दिया. We said large scale cannot produce it. We told them a no. Small scale, nobody had the know-how to do it. उनके पास वो technology नहीं थी. They didn't know, they didn't have the knowledge to do it. So they were not doing it. They were allowed, but they were not doing it. Large scale was not allowed. Some products were restricted to small scale. So they were not doing it. So you ended up importing the product. So at the end of the day, if you're importing instead of producing yourself, it is against the Swadeshi movement. It itself is creating inefficiency in the market. So that itself, it led to inefficiency. So some products were not produced by SSIs and large industries could not produce it, thereby leading to import of the product and hence inefficiency. Acha. Now, in the last class, I explained you that many times the government did not focus on education. The government did not focus on health. Social sector pe focus bilkul nahi tha. The union government thought that this is something which the private sector should be, the state government should be doing, not the union government. So they didn't focus on this. Now, because they did not focus on education, तो बहुत सारे products को produce करने की जो knowledge है, the knowledge required to produce many products was not present. And since that knowledge itself was not present, therefore you were not going ahead and producing those products, right? Then we had export pessimism. इसके बारे में I've already talked about it. This is very important, huh? Then beta, we had something which is known as high income tax. बहुत high income tax था. The income tax during this period was 97%. So if you earn 1,000 rupees, you will end up giving 97 to the government and you will only have 3 with you. Since the income tax was so high, क्योंकि वो pyramid system हमें follow करना था ना, that is why. Pyramid system क्या था? I want to take the income of the concentrated group and give it to my lower group. This was my pyramid system. So I started charging a very high income tax rate. And since the income tax was so high, it led to the black economy. People started evading tax. So this was actually the evolution of the black economy. तब black economy बहुत ज़्यादा बढ़नी शुरू हो गई, right? Then come back, beta. So we were talking about these points. हाँ, तो हमने ये dominant role of the public sector पूरा अच्छे से elaborate कर दिया है. Now come forward. The next is the antipathy towards the private business. So antipathy towards private business, what does this say? I've already explained this. Antipathy means dislike towards the private business. So we were not liking the fact that people wanted to do business. हमें command and control economy को follow करना था. We wanted everything with the government. So there was antipathy towards the private business. Come to the next point. Hospitality to international trade. So I explained you pura export pessimism kya tha. It's related to that. License Raj and Permit Raj. फिर से हमने ये भी कर लिया है that during this period there was intensive license Raj which existed. Last point पे आते हैं बेटा. Neglect of critical social sector like education and health. So social sector जो था, education, health, that was completely neglected. The government was not focusing a lot on this sector. अगर हमने focus किया होता, if we would have focused, then in that case, beta, we would have ended up with an economy like Singapore. But क्योंकि हमने अपने human resource पे इतना focus नहीं किया, that is the reason we did not have a good economy. So I want to write some more points here. I want to elaborate on this. Fail to ensure that poor could get access to health and education. तो हमने अपने जो people who were below the poverty line, we failed to ensure that they could get health and education well, right? Then we have seen that जो हमारी East Asian economies थी, they were successful because they invested in education and healthcare. However, still, even though East Asian economy invested in these, India failed to invest in these two sectors, right? Then, beta, when we look at China and South Korea, inke human indicators, they were changing much faster. And so human indicators like HDI, it helps us to understand how my humans are there, how my economy is performing, kitna human development ho raha hai. So what we saw that if I compare China and South Korea with India, so unke human indicators, they were growing much faster. That means they were growing much better as compared to the Indian economy. And neglect of human development led to comprehensive failure in poverty alleviation. Right? तो बेटा एक तरीका that I explained you कि अगर हमें poverty हटानी है, if we want to remove poverty, it was the pyramid system that you take the income from the rich and you give income to the poor. But better than that is where you invest in human development, where you would go ahead and you put all your money in developing the human sector, right? In going ahead and reducing poverty by investing in education, teaching people so that they can work hard. But that was not done. So poverty could not be elevated in the long run. Poverty zyada time ke liye hat nahi pai. It could not be elevated. And in fact, the number of people in poverty it rose by 120 million over the period from 210 million to 329 million. This was better in 1950 to 60. This was 1977 to 78. तो क्या देखा गया कि poverty कम तो नहीं हुई, rather poverty simply increased. So we saw that the number of people who were below poverty, they actually increased by 120 million. During 1950 to 60, we had 210 million people under the poverty. And during 1977-78, 329 million under the poverty. So the number of people who were under poverty actually increased. But then ended the period of Indira Gandhi, right? She will come back to power, don't worry. She came back to power later. So then the period of Indira Gandhi ended, and we had a Janata Party coalition government being formed for the next 3 years.